We are now ready to begin week 4, and this week we will be looking at chapter 2B, which deals with personnel management. If you have never been employed, this week may not make a lot of sense to you. However, if you are employed or have been previously employed, then you will understand completely the significance or the importance in good personnel management. So to begin with, we need to address the issue that if you are going to be a greenhouse manager, you may not be able to find workers. And it seems like with all the people who like plants and all the people who have interest in gardening, that finding workers for a greenhouse would be really easy, but this isn't the case. Because if you are a greenhouse grower, you will probably be competing with other small businesses or chains for your employment. And many times there's very little training offered in a greenhouse. You might have a safety training the first week, but then beyond that part, it's kind of a job-by-job training, which is not always satisfactory for some people. You also need to keep in mind that other business or chains especially may offer benefits. So if you're offering a salary, but they can offer a salary with benefits, then they're automatically going to be able to attract more employees. Also, many greenhouses have no handbook, so people don't know what's expected, and people who don't know what's expected oftentimes don't feel valued or that they're completing their job appropriately. So these are some common things that we notice in greenhouses. So let's look at some common problems of internal communications that occur in businesses, not just greenhouses, but thinking in terms of greenhouse. First of all is the misconception that if I know it, then everyone must know it. I can remember a time when I would send students to the greenhouse and ask them to transplant geraniums from 804s to 3.5-inch pots. And I walked into the greenhouse and nothing had been done, and the students were just standing there looking around. And when I asked them why they hadn't done what I'd asked them, they told me they didn't know what geraniums were. And so just because you know something doesn't mean that everyone that works for you will, and you need to make sure that you let them know specifically and that they understand what you're talking about. There's also this idea that we hate bureaucracy. We don't like all the paperwork, all the policies and procedures and all the manuals, and so we just aren't going to write that stuff down. But as your greenhouse grows especially, those policies and procedures become more important so that all of your employees are on the right track. Then you have to remember that maybe you think you told everyone, but you might not have. And unless you have some kind of meeting in place or a to-do list or a system in which the message gets taken to everyone, then you may have employees who aren't on task, and that costs your company money. And then, of course, there's the, did you hear what I meant for you to hear? You always have to keep in mind that communication is a two-way street. There's always what was said and what was heard. And so what you tell someone to do or ask someone to do may not be exactly what they thought you asked for them to do. So it's not a bad idea to have them repeat back to you what they're going to do. Then you need to look at the fifth thing here. Our problems are too big to have to listen to each other. That is not the case. You always need to be listening to each other. I know that sometimes when people are tired or they're stressed, it's easy to do what's urgent rather than what's important. And then you have all these misunderstandings and people get upset. But you need to be sure that you always sit and listen to one another. The sixth point is, so what's to talk about? If you don't know exactly what the problem is, or if you don't hear employees stating problems, then sometimes people assume that there is no problem. But you need to be talking to your employees and making sure that there is no problem, because sometimes there's a problem, we just don't recognize it. There's data and there's information, and I can't stress this point enough. If you can't organize the data so that it's useful to you, then you're not going to benefit from having data. So be sure that you know how to process what has been told to you by customers or your employees. And then there's this last, if I need your opinion, I'll tell it to you. You don't need to have that attitude. You need to remember that your employees and their opinions are important to the successful operation on a day-to-day basis, so be sure that you're always willing to stop and listen to what they're telling you. So just because we know problems exist does not mean that we can't take steps to eliminate those problems, or at least kind of avoid them in some cases. You need to remember, and you need to encourage your management, if you hire other managers, that communication is important, and without it, your business can't succeed. That being said, some people just don't come by communication skills as naturally as others. But you need to remember that those skills can be developed, and there are trainings, and there are websites, and there are books, and there's just an unlimited amount of resources that can help develop the communication skills of your management team. You also need to make sure that the people who are in charge of meetings have some meeting skills as well. In other words, these people need to know how to organize a meeting, keep the meeting on task, and how to listen for the opinions of people in those meetings. And then finally, each person should learn to take responsibility for communication. Especially when it comes to managers in your business, they need to make sure that they not only tell employees, but they also make sure that the employees understood. And some people say, well, that's not really my job. However, if you don't take the time to make sure that you have communicated effectively, then you're going to cost the company money. Earlier, I mentioned that communication is a two-way street. So you need to make sure that you have downward communication as well as upward communication. Downward communication includes things like making sure that every employee has an employee handbook that tells what all they need to do, or having procedures set in place that they can always follow. Upward communication means that you're letting employees give status reports to their supervisors, so telling what they did or problems that they saw or issues that need to be resolved. You have to make sure that that communication is going in both directions. And you can see the screen here, developing a basic communication plan. This is on page 15 of your book, and you can read this on your own, but it is important for you to have a communication plan in place so that your employees know who they can go to, and so that you know who you need to tell certain messages to. This is essential in surviving as far as keeping employees faithful or loyal to your business. So what happens when you get past all of the communication stuff and you need to put it into practice? Hey, I really need a new employee. Well, the first thing you need to do is define the job role. Specifically outline what is going to be the responsibility of this new person. Taking time to do this will help you know if you really need to hire someone new, as well as giving them some direction once they are hired. It'll also help you find the right person for the job. The second thing here is hiring to fill the new role. When you do this, you need to advertise the position. You need to let current employees know if it's something they could apply for. Be sure that you do not ask questions about race, nationality, age, gender, disabilities, marital status, spouses, children in their care, criminal records, or credit records. You are not allowed by law to ask about these things, so be sure that you, in the interview process, avoid those questions. Once you have decided upon a candidate, you need to follow up with an offer letter. In this letter, you need to let them know what they'll be compensated, any benefits they might receive, and when you expect them to start. You also need to attach the job description and ask them to sign a copy of the letter and return it to you, just so that you know that they have agreed to take the position. And when they do this on their first day, you need to start a personnel file that has everything that has to do with that employee. Their signed letter of acceptance, any tax withholding forms, jobs descriptions, benefit forms, anything that might come into play later. Then you need to orient your employee right away. You need to be sure that you welcome them. It's not a bad idea to take them around the facilities on the first day, review the policies of the company, assign a staff member to work with them for a couple of days. You could take them out on the first day for lunch, and then meet with them at the end of the first day, and probably again at the end of the first week, to see if they have any questions. Then you need to make sure that you always keep those basic communication skills in place that we talked about earlier. You also need to make sure that you take time to effectively delegate jobs to people. If you know there's a specific employee who likes to do one thing and there's another employee who hates that job, then you need to delegate that responsibility to the person who enjoys it. You also need to make sure that you delegate responsibilities to people who will see that the job gets finished. It's not a bad idea to do performance reviews on your employees. Every so often, probably yearly, you want to call them into your office and let them know that they're doing a good job and that you've noticed what's going on. If you'll do this, then employees will feel more confident in what they're doing and what they're accomplishing. This also will make the firing process a little more easy, because if you've recognized a problem, then you can show the documented records of where, hey, this is what wasn't going right last year, I've spoke to you about this, and this is why you're being released. You do want to make sure that you take a little bit of time and consider what you're going to do before you fire an employee, because you don't want to fire someone just because you're mad. If you do decide to fire them, then you need to do it promptly, and you need to write a letter of termination to them so that everything is in writing. However, I would recommend that before you just up and fire someone, unless it's something that they've done that's illegal, that you give them a few warnings and document those warnings and put those warnings in their personnel file. I've made reference to policies and procedures, and I think earlier I mentioned a manual, and it's a good idea for you to create a manual for your greenhouse. And as a matter of fact, your assignment this week is going to be to create a manual for a greenhouse. You'll see here there's a link, and this link is included in your textbook. I would strongly recommend that if you're going to develop a policies and procedures manual, that you use a lawyer. That way that they can let you know of the federal, state, and local laws regarding employment practices. So there's different laws, and you want to make sure that you abide by those laws. You also want to make sure that all employees have read the manual and understand and accept its contents. They need to sign a form saying that this is the case, that they understand what they've read, and that they'll agree to it. And then they need to provide the signed form to you or whoever the administrator is, so that can go in their personnel record. The policies do not constitute a contract between the organization and the employer. So you might want to include like a statement such as the one here. Nothing contained in or implied by this manual creates or shall be deemed to create or constitute a contractual obligation to employees on part of the organization. The policies, procedures, and guidelines contained in this manual are subject to change at any time, do not confer any obligation on the part of the organization, and do not create any right to employment on the part of the organization. This just gives you a little bit of legal protection if you were to change something in your policies and procedures manual. And you need to be careful that you always make sure that your employees know if you do change something, however, because they have signed an agreement that they understand, and if you make a change, you'll want them to sign a new agreement stating that they do understand. As you create your policies and procedures manual, both for class and for a greenhouse business, you'll want to remember that there are certain laws that are important. If you refer to page 29 and 30 in your book, it's going to give you some outlines of the laws that you need to look at. I would strongly encourage you to look at those laws before you create your policies and procedures handbook. Make sure that everything in the policies and procedures handbook comply with these laws, because you don't want to be in violation of a federal or state law. Then you also, and I know this is small, but you can see this on page 30 in your book, you need to know how long that you should keep each type of record. So for instance, payroll records need to be kept for 3 years. These need to be kept on record for 3 years because of EA, Equal Pay Act, FMLA, and FLSA laws. Form 19s need to be kept for 3 years after hire or 1 year after termination. And so you can see that all of your records need to be kept for different amounts of times, and it's really important that you know this. I know that we've flown through this chapter and there's a lot more there, but you can take some time and look at that. By midnight, February 16th, you do need to complete the Chapter 2B handout, which is available in eLearn. And then you need to complete the Chapter 2B assignment, which is creating a policies and procedures manual. Please do not wait on getting started on this because it's a rather lengthy assignment. That being said, have a great week.